Well, hello, doctors and students. Welcome back to the UCM podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bill Davis, and with me is Dr. Rachae Bell. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Bell.
Thank you. Hey.
Excited to have you again. Great practices up in the Spokane area. Tell us about you, Doc. For anybody that out there doesn't know you, introduce yourself to our audience.
All right. I graduated from Life Chiropractic College in 2011. So I'm coming up on 14 years now in practice, and graduated and did an associateship in Seattle area with Dr. Darren White, and loved my experience and the road or the path that he had kind of given for me to help me open my practice back home in Spokane. So I did an associateship with him for 3 years, and then he helped me open my practice in Spokane, and then purchased that from him after 2 years. So we have our original South Hill location, and then we opened our second location in 2020. So it'll be 5 years coming up in June.
Nice. So yourself and 3 total associates, is that right?
3 associates and myself, so 4 docs total right now. Yep.
Right. And so then there's the 2 practices, 2 different locations. And how many doctors are at each location?
Typically, we try to have 2 at each location. Right now, we have a doc on maternity leave, so I'm primarily at the location here at the North office, and then we kind of shuffle docs around to cover, where the patients are at and adapt our hours to accommodate that.
Nice.
But ideally, yes, 2 at each location, and then sometimes we'll have a floater kind of going to both offices.
Cool. So, want to talk about, the associates and locations and all that kind of stuff. But something you mentioned, one of your doctors right now is on maternity leave. And I know as we were getting ready for this interview, you mentioned that, you've had quite a few different associates and yourself go through maternity leave and bringing babies to work and all those kinds of things. And so I'd love to talk about that more, because I know that that's something that I don't know if it's a trend, but I've heard more and more doctors starting to do that or want to do that when it comes to having babies and how they can work and also take care of their babies. So can you talk more about that? What's been going on with the maternity leave and how all that works?
Yeah, the interesting part about practice for me is that I actually halted the idea of having children because I had such a big idea for business. And I wanted to have multiple locations, multiple docs, train associates, how I felt like my experience was so wonderful to, recreate that, because you hear, the chiropractic eat their own story. And I just wanted to change the landscape and create something different than that mentality. And so I was like, I don't see myself pushing the business and the family pedal at the same time. I didn't at the time really have any mentors that were female mentors who had children and families. And so I couldn't envision it. And, long story short, I had a doc, Dana Klum, really work on me at a Blair conference and tell me that I could do it and do all the things. And you just have to jump in. And so I said, okay, we're going to give it a go. I don't know how it's going to work, and I don't see it happening, but we'll trudge through it. And so here we are now. I've had 2 kids go through maternity leave. Dr. Williams has been with us 8 years. She had her first child and has been through maternity leave, and she's currently on maternity leave right now with her second. And we also have a staff member on maternity leave who's coming back soon. And the whole idea is to be able to bring 3 months off. Very, very important for me to allow our staff and our team members to be able to spend that first 3 months with their kiddos. That infant stage is so critical for hormone balance and postpartum depression, reducing risk of that, nursing, and just whole family wellness in those first 3 months. And I'm on a lot of women's groups for chiropractic, and I hear stories. It's like, oh, I was off for 3 weeks and I had to jump in because I had to be able to afford my overhead. And I really just wanted to create an environment where we could have a different idea of what that looked like, maternity leave looked like. and feel safe and comfortable still to be able to do that, and know that your patients are still going to be taken care of, and you can come back and jump right back into practice seeing your patients and have somewhat of a modified schedule. So so it's a challenge, but we've done it, and I think it's recreatable, and I think it's sustainable, and I'm really excited about it.
So you said that first 3 months after after you have the baby, home with the baby, and other doctors just cover, right? And then after that 3 months, what happens?
We do a modified schedule, part-time essentially, and honestly, every baby's different. So we kind of have a target that we're working towards, and then we pivot depending on each kiddo. Both of my kiddos were super easy, super chill, and I chalk that up to how peacefully they were brought into the world with the chiropractic lifestyle and home births and all the things. But not every baby is that way, even if they were with the chiropractic lifestyle, But so they were really easy to have in the office, and I did like half days essentially, 3 to 4 days a week, and had the kiddo with me all the way up until they were about 8 to 9 months old. Between 6 and 8 months, they start to get an opinion, they start to get mobile, and they just want mom to hold them. They won't let anybody else hold them. And so that's when we begin to transition them out of the practice and then increase our patient hours back to the full time.
Gotcha. So they're there in the practice with you, and while you're seeing patients and all that. And so how does, like, say that the baby's crying, right? And you're sitting with a new patient. What
Yeah.
happens? What happens?
The whole team is involved in this. It takes a village. So our current, office kind of scheme is a front desk and a CA and a doc. So those three people together are really critical. And sometimes there's a floater person if they're, a second front desk, or they're doing billing or something. There might be an extra hand as well. Sometimes we've had interns that were around and they were finishing up their last round at school, and so we had an extra hand there. But anybody literally just jumps in. So when I was seeing patients, if my kiddo was taking a nap in the pack and play in the back closet, we had a monitor in there. The front desk would go grab them. They would actually even change their diaper and then figure out how to get them in the pack, and they would wear them. So the front desk would wear the babies and the CAs would wear the babies. I thought initially, before I had my first kiddo, in my head trying to plan all the things that I would wear the baby, I could just throw them on my back. Turns out it's impossible to do a Blair adjustment with a baby on your back or on your front.
Right.
So I just brought all the things that I knew they liked. And really, when they're so small, 3 months, they just want to be on you and snuggle and sleep. And so if they, have a dirty diaper, and the docs are humming along and doing adjustments, then they go and adjust. But what was critical was the flow of nursing breaks, which mitigated a lot of that crying and, because they cry for two reasons, right? I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or I, have a dirty diaper. And so I would nurse right before my patient block. So from, if it's an 8 to 6 day, the kiddos nurse at that time around every 2 hours. And so if it's consistent and you can keep that schedule, then you put those blocks in there deliberately around that. And so for our 4-hour block, in the morning, it worked really good. 8 to noon, I would nurse from 7:45 or 7:40. Initially, babies take a little longer, so I would do a half-hour block just to give myself the extra time. And then as they get stronger, I could chunk those down to 15-minute blocks. But that initial was a 30-minute block. So I would nurse from 7:30 to 8, start to see patients at 8. And then from 8 to 10, regular patient visits. I'd put another 30-minute block in there, which was my natural new patient block anyways. So I just skipped that new patient. I would nurse baby then, and then from 10:30 to noon, I would be seeing new patients and regular visits again, and then I would jump right back into my nursing break. Then we would have an hour and a half for lunch, nurse right before my 2 hour block, and then again at 4, and then again at 6. So that flow was really critical in keeping the baby happy. And usually at that 10 o'clock nurse, they would then fall asleep again. So then I'd just lay them right back in the pack and play. They'd sleep until the next, nursing block till noon. And 10 o'clock is a pretty common nap time for kiddos that age when they're really little. So that's what helped the flow. And then if they woke up, we would lay them on the floor. We would give them, depending as they grow, once they start rolling and moving, they're happy on the floor. Once they're really sitting up, we had those walkers. So we had a walker and they just bang around everything around the office. Patients love seeing them. And they're interactive, so they smile. We also put one of those feeding chairs at the front desk. So it's like a little booster seat, but you hook it to the countertop. So it's not a big chair that's clunky around the office. And then it was right next to the front desk. So once they started eating solids and sitting upright, then we would put them in that chair for a few minutes. So we literally just, bounce them around.
That's so cool. Yeah. So this is a great reason for having an organized schedule as well, right? Like you said, that we talk about a lot, making sure you have block scheduling, right? That you have specific times where you're seeing existing patients and new patients and all these kinds of things. If you didn't have all that in place already, it would have been so much more difficult to even make this work, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so yeah, again, we talk about this a lot is you got to make sure that you're scheduling your patients in such a way that your practice will flow throughout the day, right? Having specific new patient times, having specific existing patient times, and all that kind of thing is crucial. So you've had, like you said, you've had the some associates go on maternity leave as well, and you've had a lot of associates over the years now. I think you said like 10 different associates since you've opened. And so talk about associates. Obviously, something else we're always talking about in this podcast is growing practices, getting more multi-doctor practices, and eliminating the solo practice from upper cervical practice. So what are some of the things that you've learned about associates over the years, as far as some positives, some negatives? What's some of the key things that you've found that have been key to developing strong associate relationships?
Well, first and foremost, what we just talked about. Again, I almost didn't have a family because I didn't think I could be the chiropractor and build and grow the way I wanted and have a family. And, this demonstrates you can do both, and you can push the pedal and earn a fantastically comfortable, lifestyle income as an associate and go on maternity leave. And I think that's the big fear of, how am I going to do that? And when you have a team and you have a group of people that can rally around you, and it's like, okay, when you go on maternity leave, I'll take care of you. And when I go on maternity leave, you'll take care of me. And we work together, and it creates this amazing, culture that I think women in chiropractic really, really need, because a lot of mentors are men and they've never carried a baby and adjusted at the same time with their belly 8 months pregnant.
Right.
They've never felt the experience of transitioning into motherhood when your hormones change and everything, and you all of a sudden become this whole new person, wondering how your heart lives outside of you, but you also have your first baby, which is your practice, and all the patients that you love. And so that's the biggest. And that is true for vacations. That's true for getting sick. One of the things that we've really, really worked on over the last 3 years is not maximizing our schedule so much that if somebody is sick, that you're like, ugh, like you're going to get sick too, because you just overflowed your patient visits and your hours that your capacity. So we've shrunk everybody's hours down so that if we do need to pivot and we do need to cover and somebody's sick or somebody wants to go on vacation, we actually have the bandwidth to still create and have a wonderful culture. And we're excited and happy if somebody goes on vacation. When I was
Mm.
first in practice, it was me and Roxanne. There was two of us. If I was out, the patients were done. Nobody
Yeah.
was getting seen that day. So I never missed. And
Mm.
Roxanne was the same. She could never take a vacation. She didn't want to miss because then she knew I would be out because she was doing everything. And so now we've created that environment where it's okay if you go on vacation. We have docs to cover, your patients will be taken care of. Docs are willing to add hours because they're being compensated for that. And so it's great.
Awesome.
Those are all
So
the positives.
yeah, so helping doctors understand that, they can have a life, right? They're not just going to be focused on the practice, having that margin in place, giving doctors a reasonable schedule and understanding of how all of that works. That sounds like has been a lot of important things when it comes to the associate relationships.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the challenges are we're all human and we all have different ideas and ways that we, want to do things or how we see things going. And so navigating that and being really clear up front with expectations and how we do things in the office. And our systems are really clear, as you mentioned, with the block booking, that's just one example, but our patient flows the same with every doc. We have scripts and things that we allow the autonomy to be you and to bring your own personality, but the whole goal is that the patient is not coming to see me, they're coming to get Blair upper cervical chiropractic, and it doesn't matter which doc or which office they're at, they're going to get the same or very similar experience when they come into the office.
Nice. Yeah, that's again so important. Having those clear expectations up front, having the systems in place, making sure that it's not a personality dependent practice. Another doctor can be in there and see patients and be successful within your system. All of that is again so crucial. And
I
then
think
good.
another
Yep.
thing that's interesting is the mentality of an associate. And I don't know how to close this gap necessarily because the word associate for so many years has come with what I've learned from associates is it's come with a less than feel behind it. Like, oh, if you're going to be a chiropractor, you got to own your own business. And if you're just an associate your whole life, oh, you're less than, like you never ran a practice. And I think that's really doing a disservice to our whole culture in chiropractic in general, because really, the group mentality, as you mentioned, we are not trying to recreate the same mistakes over and over again. And we run ourselves into the ground, burning the candle at both ends, trying to do business and practice and marketing and have a family and, do your QuickBooks and your payroll and your taxes and pay your rents and all the things that it's way too much. And with a group practice, it really takes all of those hats and takes them off of one person, and you can distribute it evenly and create a team that works together and has much more of a balance versus, balls to the wall, running ourselves into the ground. And then that's another thing I see on all of the, the women chiropractic. It's like, oh, I'm burnt out. I've been doing this for 20 years and I'm done. Like if I was burnt out in 20 years from practice, I would be out of practice by 50.
Right.
And I want to practice till I'm 80, and maybe that I don't want to have to practice till I'm 80. I want to be able to retire at 50. But I don't want to retire at 50 from practice. I want to feel comfortable enough that I could, but I also want to feel comfortable enough that I actually enjoy it and want to keep practicing until I'm 80. And when the joy gets stripped, then it's done. Your fire burned out, right? Like there's no smolder anymore. There's no blowing that fire back to light. And so in a group mentality, I think you have more of a chance of keeping that fire lit for longer. You have people on your team, on your side, you can bounce things. Community. I mean, it's really about community.
Yeah, and I love that too. Because associates are not lesser. They're doctors, right? These are doctors who are serving people just like everyone else. And it's not it's not a bad thing to work for someone else if that's where you're going to thrive most effectively, right? There's going to be doctors who, yes, they want to go and they want to open their own practices. That's great. They can be trained in an office and then sent out, right? But
For
there
sure.
also are people who thrive in a set, I'm going to say a secondary role, but just not a clinic director role, right? They're in a role within the practice where they can bring their strengths and they can bring what they offer and build the team up in a unique way. Like they can be a star in their role, right?
100%. And again, that's where it's like I really am trying to figure out a way to change the language around that. Like it's not secondary, because if we don't have both, then we're
Yeah.
not serving. So they're actually both primary and both are equally as important, because again, in order to create that culture of community and balance, and it just, especially in an environment where there's children and babies, the maternity leave, like it's just so important to have a team to, and everybody's an equal player, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so, yeah, I mean, I know, like Dr. Justin Brown, we've had on this podcast multiple times. He doesn't even call his associates anymore. He just says doctors, right?
Right.
And that maybe that's the answer, right? It's just like, hey, we're going to hire another doctor, right? It's not we're not hiring an associate, we're hiring another doctor to be part of our team. And that's
Totally.
yeah, and that's
That's exactly how I feel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so as part of, expanding the impact that you're making on your community, you've opened the second location, like you said, about 5 years ago. And I know your goal is to open more locations. And so can you talk through the decision you made to open the second location? Because I mean, obviously not that's even a smaller group within upper cervical chiropractic who have multiple locations. And so what went into that? What was some of the things that you learned maybe that you can apply when you open the third location, that will help you or help others who are looking to open multiple locations? I'd love to, just talk through a lot of that stuff.
So the ultimate goal was a play off of Darren, right? Like and even in chiropractic school, Sean Dill was our philosophy teacher, and I just resonated so much with some of the philosophy and the goals and things that he was teaching, and then into the business class. So my goals of that were very rooted from school, and then facilitated once I did my associateship. But the idea is, from my perspective, was building one location, and then once we grew out of that, we would open a second location. It wasn't, oh, we're just doing okay here, and then we're going to open a second location. So we did become to grow out of our initial, right? Like we can't have, our initial location is 2,000 square feet, and with the scheduling, it just doesn't work to have 4 docs in there, throughout the week, right? It just doesn't work with the flow of everything. And so in order to hire on more docs, we really had to think about opening a second location. And so that's where we were at. And the second location actually came at perfect time. It was probably the most challenging, but also the perfect, because in the middle of COVID, everything shut down. We couldn't find contractors. They didn't want to come because they were getting fines for being on the job site and not isolating. We actually put up black tarps in our windows and said, hey, if you guys want to come work, like just come work, and we found people that were like-minded and just kept pushing on, and we made it happen. But then we could only have 10 people in a space. Well, when you have a 2,000 square foot office and you've got 3 doctors and 2 staff, well, there's 5 people. Well, now only you got 3 or 4 clients in the resting chair. You got 3 or 4 clients waiting to get checked. You got 2 clients getting checked. There's way too many people. So we actually were able to maximize our schedule because we split everybody up. So once we opened, then we could expand, and then we were humming along both offices when before Becky, Dr. Williams was on for a week and I was on for a week. We only had 1 doctor each week instead of having both of us there together, which we normally had been doing. So it was a really strategic time and it was chaos because we were opening in the middle of all that chaos and figuring out what to do, plus trying to follow all the protocol. But ultimately it was a blessing, and we've been able to hire 2 docs since, and now we have 2 docs in each location, and ultimately could probably fit 3 but in each location, 4 in one of them before we open another location. So yeah, so we're hiring doctors essentially all the time. Yep, looking for the right people.
Yeah, and that's so. And as far as like how you spaced your locations, can you talk about that and how that might apply to the other locations you'll open? Because you're planning on open, I think you said 5 locations, right? With kind of in the Spokane Valley. Is that the plan?
Yeah, within the Pacific Northwest, ultimately. Okay. And honestly, it depends on personnel. So I'm not just going to open a practice if we don't have the right people in the right seats, right?
Right.
But if there's people who want to join in our vision, mission, and culture and have the same outlook and the same upper cervical mindset as we do, then we're balls to the wall on that. So the spacing of them for us in the Spokane region, it's funny. People who live in the South, they won't come up north. They think that they have to drive to Canada. It's like they never, and people who are in the Valley, they don't come to the West. Like they east to west. So it's very compartmentalized. So we did north south. So our strategic move, that second location was north. We had at the time tons of patients coming from 3 hours away from the north, and they were driving all the way across the city through downtown to get to the South Hill. So when we built our practice, we tried to put it on the outskirts of the north end of town. So it would still draw from the north in the city, but then it would be super easy for all the rural towns at the north of Spokane to access our location.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
So the same strategy right after that is that bandwidth from side to side. And I think we do have clients who live in the middle, and they will go, depending on their availability and opening of that day, they will go from practice to practice. And like we just had Dr. Hannah, he's covering Becky, Dr. Williams while she's on maternity leave. So he was practicing primarily at the North office and then went to full time at the South office. And there's still patients that love seeing him that will choose to drive. It's not far enough that they won't make that extra effort if they really want to stick with the same provider, but it's enough that some people are like, there's no way I'm going an extra 25 minutes. Like, I'm happy to see whoever,
Right.
It's also really strategic in that if somebody's sick, I only have to drive another extra 25 minutes. If my clinic's an hour away, it makes it very hard to cover staff, to cover docs. And right now, when your clinics are within 25, 30 minutes, you can shuffle people around and everybody's not like
right.
I can't do it. It's going to mess up my entire day. Like, this sucks. Where you don't want to make that extra drive or commitment. And I watched that happen with a couple docs, some of my mentors, where they opened a second location and it's like, crap, that doc that was in that location just got injured or pregnant, and now they're covering and they're driving an hour back and forth to try to cover both practices. And I kind of made a commitment to myself to not try to do
that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and with the 2 locations now, what are some of the things that you've done to try to make sure that you have the same culture at both locations, that it's not like 2 different practices, that it's all one practice with, obviously similar systems and similar feel?
Well, I think because I was in the original one and Dr. Williams was with me for so long that we really mirror each other as far as flow and patient and culture, and we really align. And so she's the clinic director at that location and I'm the clinic director at this location. And so we meet monthly and communicate. The team meets weekly. So we do, even though we're not in person, we do an all team Zoom meeting. So we do smooth running practice, any type of thing that, difficult conversations or things that we're running into that we need to troubleshoot, changes in systems. We just got the new neck care range of motion, so we're updating all of our systems around that and the timing of that and what it looks like. So, those are important things to discuss so that the systems are the same between both locations, and communication is really key. And then we also have a key player who's our office manager who practices in both. She will bounce back, so she's here some days and she's at the South Hill, so she can field questions and get a jive for culture and morale at both locations. And then she's touching base with me, if need be, in that regard. So really, it's tons of communication, and sometimes I think to myself, I'm wasting a lot of time on communication. Like I could be producing right now instead of having these meetings, but when you don't have those meetings, things really do fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're not wasting your time on communication. You're not wasting it on meetings when they're good. When they're good, when they're good meetings, you're actually saving yourself tons of time overall. Yeah.
And then team morale, like we just did one of my favorite team trainings ever. So, we try to bring the team together, all of us, and outside of the practice, because when it's all business it can get very serious, and A plus B equals C, and really we spend in the practice sometimes more time with each other than we do with our dogs or our spouse. And so we do a quarterly team training or a team fun event that just gets out. We'll do some smooth running practice stuff and systems if we need, but then also something fun where we're outside of our offices and we're doing something different and creative. And this year we went to a really fancy resort and had a nice dinner and went snowshoeing, and we brought in a comedian, and she's an improv coach and an improv comedian herself, and she gathered us up, and like she didn't just do an improv show and she didn't just teach us how to do improv. She gave us activities and I was like peeing my pants laughing. Like it was so hilarious. And honestly, the way every team member stepped up to the challenge, because it's awkward. Like you're doing things in front of people that you would never do in real life. And to be vulnerable and open in that, I just think those type of activities really enhance the community culture and the team culture and are really important on keeping the offices together and congruent.
That's cool. Very cool. So, love this conversation. Appreciate you being on the podcast once again. Is there anything else you wanted to share with our audience before we wrap up for today?
Upper cervical to the world. Keep on keeping on.
That's it. That's it. Love it. All right. As we always say, go team upper cervical.